Ethan was an orphan fostered by the Carter family. The elders of the Carter family asked him to marry into the Carter family, to have Clara as his wife, and any children they had would also bear the Carter surname. Ethan had always been deeply in love with Clara, and besides, Mr. and Mrs. Carter had raised him, so he agreed on the spot and married Clara. However, after marriage, Clara didn't get pregnant for a long time. His mother-in-law was furious. She not only forbade him from drinking or eating meat, but also prohibited him from staying up late or playing video games. Even so, nothing changed, and he still couldn't meet her expectations. Perplexed, his mother-in-law had him drink goji berries and take ginseng, and even asked him to kneel and pray to the Buddha every day. What she didn't know was that after all these years of marriage, Clara had never let him touch a single finger of hers. Later, when he was exhausted and lying in a hospital bed, even as his wife, Clara never came to see him for the last time. It was Oliver who kindly told him that he and Clara were preparing for their wedding and couldn't make it. That's when Ethan found out Clara had another family outside, only he was left alone. When he opened his eyes again, he was back at the Carter family home. Clara's mother was still joking. She asked, "Ethan, do you like our Clara?" He replied, "No. In this life, I'm going to do what I truly like." Chapter 1. The smell of hospital disinfectant still lingered at the tip of his nose, and the pain was still fresh. In front of him stood Clara's mother, his former mother-in-law, still asking, "Ethan, do you like our Clara? After graduation, would you want Clara to be your wife?" In the living room were the Carter family and some old friends of his parents. The woman spoke so gently, with kindness and affection, completely unlike the fierce and difficult person he remembered from his past life. Because he spent so little time with Clara, she had been unable to conceive for a long time, so his mother-in-law thought of all sorts of ways to make things difficult for him. She restricted his diet, forbade him from eating meat or drinking alcohol, forced him to take traditional medicine every day, and even made him pray to gods and Buddha. That wasn't the worst part. It was the constant sarcastic remarks that made him suffocate. She would question if he was a man, if he was capable at all. Once he was pushed to the limit and nearly struck her, she cried out in desperation, claiming how hard it was to raise him, an orphan. She said that if she hadn't taken him in, he would have starved to death on the streets, that she had treated him like her own son, and entrusting her daughter to him was a great kindness. But he had repaid her kindness with ingratitude and didn't know what was good for him. That was his Achilles heel, so in the end, he never laid a hand on her. As he regained his focus, she said, "Ethan, stop zoning out. If you have something to say, just say it." Mrs. Carter gave him a gentle push. He came back to his senses and looked into her eyes, eyes that were trying to conceal her urgency. If his past self had paid more attention, he would have realized that this urgency, her rush to get him and Clara together, was about dividing up his inheritance. Even later, her push for them to have a child was for the same reason. At that time, he was just a rich second-generation heir who had grown up pampered, having just suffered the blow of losing his parents. He thought he had found family and solace in the Carter household. How could he have suspected anything more? But now, after living through more than 30 years of a loveless marriage and enduring the torment of Mrs. Carter's true nature being revealed, he could see everything clearly. So he stood up, smiled, and said, "Madam, it seems you've misunderstood. I only see Clara as a sister, and after high school, I plan to attend university." Chapter 2. Mrs. Carter's face suddenly turned pale and green. In front of everyone, asking if he liked Clara was meant to get him to confirm the marriage with Clara. This way, she could push him to spin the wealth under his name without facing criticism. Mrs. Carter quickly recovered. She stood up and naturally took his hand, saying to the others, "This child is just too shy. Clara, why don't you take Ethan for a walk in the garden?" Clara was sitting across from him on the sofa, youthful, young, beautiful, and a bit aloof. She was wearing a light polka dress, the hem falling just below her calves, light and natural. A matching ribbon at her waist accentuated her slim figure. Since Mr. Carter was a close friend of his parents, Clara and he could barely be called childhood sweethearts. Since he was little, he always liked to revolve around her. When they were kids, they got along well, but as they grew older, Clara became distant. In his past life, he didn't understand and just assumed it was a matter of growing up and needing to be more mindful of the opposite sex. He never thought that in reality, Clara was simply tired of him. He was a somewhat overbearing young master with a bad temper, yet she had to follow her parents' orders and listen to him. Even though she didn't like him, she couldn't shake him off. Naturally, Clara grew frustrated. If she had ignored him, that would have been fine, but instead, she married him but never allowed him to touch her, married him but had an affair outside. He hated her. He hated himself even more. Blinded by emotion, he ended up living such a miserable life. He clenched his fists and slowly loosened them. He gently pulled his hand away from Mrs. Carter's grip, still smiling, and said, "You don't need to accompany me, Clara. You should be seeing Oliver soon, right? If you like him, you should bring him home sooner." One of the guests spoke up. "Clara has someone she likes. Then why is your mom matchmaking you?" It was only then that he looked at Clara. Her face was even worse than Mrs. Carter's, and the corners of her eyes were slightly red. He couldn't be bothered to look any longer. He greeted the people in the room and left on his own. Chapter 3. Leaving the living room, he went straight to the front yard mailbox and started rummaging through it. Among the letters, he finally found one addressed to him. "Ethan," Clara's voice came from behind. He turned around, silently hiding the letter behind his back. She asked, "Why did you say that today?" He frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" She responded, "You confessed to me yesterday, and today you say you treat me like a sister. Are you playing with me? My mom treats you like her own son, and you publicly made her lose face." He quietly looked at her. He thought of his past life, after marriage. Mrs. Carter didn't once fail to make him lose face in front of others. If he showed the slightest displeasure, it would invite Clara's resentment. She angrily said, "Hasn't my mom been good to you? She's an elder, so why should it matter if she says a few words?" So now, he returned the same words to her. Ethan smiled and said, "Your mom treats me like her own son, but even her own son can be rebellious. What's wrong with saying a few things to her?" She bit her lip and remained silent for a while, then said, "You're acting strange." He was indeed acting strange. After all, in his past life, when his parents passed away, he truly considered the Carter family his own. He had changed from his previously arrogant self. He wouldn't dare speak harshly to Mrs. Carter, and he was always careful to please Clara. Ethan sneered, "So what are you upset about now? Aren't you the one who hated me chasing after you? Now that I say I don't like you, just like you wanted, why are you upset?" After saying that, he tried to walk away, but he still wanted to open the letter in his hand. Clara spoke up again. "I didn't." Chapter 4. Ethan replied, "It doesn't matter." He thought to himself, "None of it matters, Clara. Whether you love me or not, it's meaningless." Clara frowned and said, "Trying to say nice things doesn't work. Ethan, you're still so hard to deal with." With his parents gone, he had no one to rely on, so Clara's attitude toward him had also changed significantly. In the past, she wouldn't dare to raise her voice, but now she openly called him difficult. "Am I hard to deal with?" He simply didn't follow her expectations. Her so-called nice words were just attempts to keep him under control, to lure him into proposing to her. In his past life, after they got engaged, the Carter family immediately used the excuse of needing funds for their business expansion. They made him put up most of his assets to pave the way for the Carter family. This was when private businesses were opening up everywhere, and there were chances to make money. With his help, the Carter family took control of the real estate and food industries in City A, becoming the richest family in the area. In over 30 years of a false marriage, everyone envied him for marrying into a wealthy family. But they didn't know that without him, Ethan, the Carter family would never have reached such heights. In this life, let him stand at the top, looking down on the clowns of the Carter family. Let them dance their foolish dance and destroy themselves. He couldn't be bothered to say more, so he smiled and said, "I'm difficult to deal with. So what? If you don't like it, deal with it." Chapter 5. Back in the room, Ethan hurriedly tore open the letter. He actually had an uncle. He shared the same father with his mother, but had a different mother. His uncle currently resided in France. Ethan had met this uncle once. At the time, his uncle had come to their house seeking help to treat his elderly mother. Ethan's parents provided financial assistance and introduced him to a good hospital. Afterward, their two families kept in touch from time to time, but in recent years, they had lost contact. In his past life, Ethan didn't know that his uncle had gone abroad to seek his fortune and had struck it rich by chance. His uncle didn't learn about Ethan's parents' car accident and death until a year later. When he found out Ethan had been adopted by the Carter family, he wrote to him. The letter was sent to his old home and then passed on to the Carter family's mailbox. Mrs. Carter had always known about his letter, but had chosen to keep it hidden and say nothing. It was only many years later that Ethan found out his uncle had been sending him money and letters all along, but by that time, it was too late. After reading the letter, Ethan learned that his uncle couldn't return to the country for some reason, so he had chosen to contact him through letters. This was his 10th letter, and the content was the same as the previous ones. He introduced his situation abroad, offered Ethan words of comfort, and asked if he would be willing to come to France. France was advanced, with top-tier education and specialized programs. The letter contained 10 large foreign currency bills and a flight ticket to France. Ethan's nose tingled with emotion. How wonderful! He wasn't an orphan, he had family. The flight was departing in 4 days from the neighboring South City. He steeled himself. Next, he needed to handle his parents' inheritance. The property would stay as is since the location was good and had potential for appreciation. He would split the money into 2 accounts. One half would be kept abroad, and the other half would remain in the bank. Also, he didn't really know his uncle, so he would ensure his safety before contacting him or his family. Chapter 6. Fortunately, the college entrance exams had already finished. Ethan used the excuse of going out to hang out with classmates, which made it convenient for dealing with things at the bank. He ran into some classmates, and they happily said, "We were just looking for you. Let's go to the class reunion." The gathering was at the biggest KTV in the city. At the time, singing karaoke was still a trendy activity. When he arrived, Clara was already there. A friend joked, "Why isn't Ethan here today?" "Yeah, where's your husband?" Clara frowned and complained, "I'm so sick of seeing him, and I don't like Ethan. I wouldn't marry him." Laughter filled the room. Another friend asked, "Then who do you like?" "Our class president," Clara replied. The group joked around, pushing Clara toward Oliver. The guys around Ethan awkwardly coughed. The colorful lights blinked, and only then did everyone notice him. Ethan confidently walked over and said, "What a lively atmosphere. Please continue." Clara instinctively leaned closer to Oliver and frowned. "Ethan, what are you trying to pull now? Trying to pull something?" He wanted nothing more than to expose these two, but nothing had happened yet. If he were to say that these two had ruined his life and his past life, who would believe him? Ethan smiled and said, "Clara, if I'm so annoying, why did you always take my gifts?" "What? Taking gifts doesn't mean I agree. You're really shameless," she retorted. Before she could respond further, Ethan clapped his hands and said, "Fine. If I'm not welcome, I'll leave." No one had reacted in time before he pushed open the door and left. Clara followed quickly and said, "Ethan, listen to me." Behind him, he heard a classmate shout, "Oliver fainted." Clara quickly abandoned him and said, "Ethan, that was just a slip of the tongue. Let me explain later, okay?" Before she finished speaking, she was already rushing to Oliver's side. Ethan looked coldly at her, then turned and walked away decisively. There would be no chance for an explanation. In 3 days, he would be heading to France. From now on, he would never think of her again, and she shouldn't think of him either. Chapter 7. The next day, Ethan packed up his room, throwing away what needed to be thrown away. Mrs. Carter came over and subtly asked which university he planned to apply to. Of course, he wouldn't tell her he was going abroad to study. He casually mentioned South City University just to brush it off. Mrs. Carter praised the university, then with a quick shift of tone, brought up Clara's marriage again. She said, "You can get engaged first. It won't affect you and Clara going to university." Before he could even refuse, she quickly comforted him, saying, "I've already asked Clara. She and that Oliver are just ordinary classmates. You're overthinking things." Ethan was speechless. She still wouldn't let it go. He distanced himself from Mrs. Carter and said, "Madam, I truly have no interest in Clara." Mrs. Carter didn't believe him. She quickly reassured him, "Good boy. I'll make sure Clara breaks it off completely with that classmate." Unfortunately, the words were overheard by Clara. She didn't understand the situation but quickly walked over to him, her gaze filled with disappointment and disgust. She angrily said, "Young master, do you need everyone to revolve around you? Oliver is weak and his family isn't well off. I've just been looking out for him a little. Why do you have to make it public and even report to my mother?" As if venting her frustration, She tugged at the bracelet on her wrist. The beads fell off, clattering to the ground. They scattered everywhere, disappearing from sight. She said bitterly, I was going to apologize to you, but now it seems unnecessary. I'm telling you clearly, there's nothing between me and Oliver. Don't make me distance myself from him because of you. After venting her anger, Clara kicked over the trash bin by the door. The bin fell to the ground, spilling out miscellaneous items, figurines, scarves she'd knitted herself, origami cranes, and little stars all rolled out. Clara's eyes reddened in an instant. She bit her lip and said, These were all gifts I gave you. Ethan frowned and said, Well, if you don't like them, then throw them away. He kicked the beads that had rolled at his feet. They were just nuisances. Chapter 8. In 2 days, Ethan would board a flight to France. The distance from City A to South City wasn't short, so he had to head to South City in advance. He had already prepared his passport for a previous overseas trip. He didn't have many belongings. The valuables and property certificates were stored in a bank safe deposit box. Mr. and Mrs. Carter were away on business in another city, so he didn't need to say goodbye to them in person. They had indeed taken care of him for many years, but it was all for the inheritance. The money his uncle sent was withheld by Mrs. Carter, and it had been enough for his expenses all these years. As he was dragging his suitcase out, he ran into Clara and Oliver in the lobby. It seemed like they had just come back from somewhere. Clara noticed the luggage in his hand. She asked, Where are you going? Are you going to report to my mom about me and Oliver again? Ethan motioned for them to step aside and said, Not interested. I'm just going to a classmate's house. Madam already knew that wasn't a lie. He did tell Mrs. Carter he would be staying at a classmate's house for a couple of days. Clara, still in a bad mood, coldly said, Go by yourself. Don't let the driver pick you up. That's my family's driver, not yours. Ethan didn't care. Oliver, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up in a humble tone. Ethan, I was just kicked out by my family and have nowhere to go. Clara kindly offered to let me stay. I heard from Madam that you and Clara had some unpleasantness because of me, and I'm really sorry. Clara snorted and said, You don't need to apologize to him. Clara wrapped her arm around Oliver's and said, If it weren't for his big mouth, my mom wouldn't have bothered you. It was clear they were both in cahoots. Ethan found it meaningless and just walked ahead. Behind him, Oliver continued in a weak tone. Clara, don't you want to go talk to Ethan? She replied, I don't need to bother with him. He's an orphan with no home to return to. He'll come back sooner or later. Clara's tone was firm, cold, and disdainful. Ethan paused for a moment, then continued walking. So they really thought he had nowhere else to go and treated him this way. It didn't matter. When they meet again, he'll make sure they taste the feeling of having no place to go. Chapter 9. On the first day Ethan left, Clara didn't feel much. On the second day, she grew restless and asked the housekeeper, Has Ethan not come back yet? The housekeeper shook his head. The young woman's beautiful brows furrowed slightly as she complained, Can't stand him. Who does he think he is? What's so special about him? He acts like he's some rich young master. After venting, she asked the housekeeper again, Did Ethan say he went to a classmate's house? The housekeeper shook his head again. Clara felt even more irritated, as if there was a heavy stone pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Passing by Ethan's room, she noticed something shiny by the large leaf plant near the door. She realized something and bent down to pick it up. It was a lone bead from the bracelet. Clara was momentarily stunned. Then, as if compelled, she squatted down and searched for other beads. A feeling of regret rose in her heart. Why did she pull apart the bracelet? This was clearly the graduation gift she had planned for Ethan. She had prepared it with great care. Ethan was arrogant and overbearing, but after his parents passed away, he had mellowed out. She knew this too, but why had she acted so willfully toward him? She thought, when Ethan returns, she would sincerely apologize to him. But she waited 1 day, then 2, then 3, and still Ethan didn't come home. Her anxiety reached its peak. She began calling Ethan's friends, and the answer from each of them was that they hadn't seen Ethan. She didn't believe it. She went from house to search, but still couldn't find him. Finally, she opened the door to Ethan's room. The once cozy room was now missing all the stuffed animals she had given him, the ones she had loved since childhood. Ethan's clothes and shoes were gone as well. The room suddenly felt so much emptier. Clara hurriedly searched the room, trying to find any traces that Ethan had ever lived there, but the only thing she found was a letter pressed under a book on the desk. It read, "I'm gone. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, please don't worry." Just a few words, but none of it was meant for Clara. Chapter 10. After the plane landed, Ethan didn't immediately call his uncle using the contact details he'd been given. Instead, he hired a detective to check on his uncle's family situation. Nothing too detailed, just a simple inquiry to see if the family was harmonious, and so on. He thought to himself that no family already in chaos would willingly accept a stranger relative. Thankfully, the news he received was good. His uncle owned a large farm in a certain state, had a decent reputation locally, and his family members were few and got along well. Ethan also prepared for the worst. If his uncle wasn't reliable, he could still study in France by himself. It wasn't a big deal. After completing the investigation and buying gifts for everyone, he finally contacted his uncle. When his uncle found out he had arrived, he immediately came to pick him up. 3 days later, Ethan finally arrived at his uncle's farm. His uncle was more than 10 years older than his mother. Due to his early years of gold mining, combined with the harsh sun and wind, he looked much older. He wasn't very talkative, especially with Ethan, but he just sighed and said, "When I see you, I think of your mother." He handed Ethan a card and told him to spend it as he wished, took him to ride horses around the farm, and let him mess around with the big dog he kept, though the dog didn't look pleased. Ethan's aunt was a slightly plump white woman who was great at making desserts. But he had to say, the desserts were really sweet. Eating too many made him feel sick. Still, she was incredibly enthusiastic, always trying new ways to make him treats. His uncle's daughter was already married to a Chinese-American man, and thanks to his sister and brother-in-law, Ethan could still enjoy some Chinese food. His uncle's son was only a year older than him. When he saw that Ethan was a little introverted and didn't talk much, he patted him on the shoulder and said, "Bro, with your height and build, just get a car, tidy up a little, and the girls will be all over you." Then he took Ethan to all kinds of young people's parties and gatherings. With him around, Ethan quickly blended in with the local youth. After the summer break, it was time to start university. Thanks to his uncle's connections, he went straight to his cousin's university. He chose a major in finance. Nothing special. His past experiences and his current assets were enough for him to make a career. Chapter 11. Life in France was much warmer than Ethan expected. During the holidays, he played around the farm and helped out with chores. At school, he attended classes with classmates from all over the world and worked on assignments. In his second year, after doing sufficient research, he decided to try his hand at international trade to gain some experience. He discussed it with his uncle, who didn't reject his decision. Instead, he asked if Ethan had enough money and whether he wanted him to introduce him to some business owners. Having a mentor would certainly help, as it would save him some time, but for a beginner like him, making mistakes wasn't a big deal. He was young, with time, money, and room for trial and error. So he teamed up with 3 other classmates to invest in a small company. They started exporting France's clothing and food to neighboring countries. A year later, in his third year, the company made a small profit, but each classmate had their own ambitions. Some wanted to make more money and start their own business, while others felt the profits were unstable and decided to bail out. So they announced the dissolution of the company. Starting the company gave Ethan a lot of experience. He thought that if he owned a factory and handled the products directly, he would make even more money. He made another plan, did more research, and prepared to start another business. Before graduation, during his free time, he used the money he earned to buy a car for his uncle. He also bought an apartment near the school for himself and lived with his cousin. In the apartment, they adopted many stray cats. Some were disabled, some were healthy, and he took them all in. When the sunlight poured onto the balcony, the furry creatures would curl up into a ball and sleep at his feet. He would pet one and tease another, and it would make him think of his past life. On their first wedding anniversary, he remembered that both Clara and he liked cats. Clara had said on their wedding day that they should get a cat together, so he bought a little Siamese kitten as a surprise for her. But when he brought it back, Mr. and Mrs. Carter immediately complained, saying that their priority now should be preparing Clara for pregnancy, and that the cat would affect a pregnant woman. The poor Siamese kitten didn't know what it had done wrong, curling up in his arms looking pitiful. He had no choice but to give it to a classmate who also loved cats. He gave them money and supplies and visited the kitten regularly. Now, holding a large long-haired ginger cat. It felt like he hadn't thought about Clara or her family for a long time. After all, he was happy now. No need to remember those bad memories. Chapter 12. In the second semester of his third year, Ethan started a new company. This time, he got into the dairy industry, from raising cows to processing dairy products, gradually improving the entire industry chain. By the time he graduated, the production chain was fully established, which allowed him to drastically reduce costs. Whether it was the business in France or the export business, he now had the confidence to negotiate prices with partners. Once everything was stable, he proposed to go back to his home country to visit. His uncle didn't stop him, and his cousin accompanied him back. As soon as they landed, someone covered his eyes. She asked, "Ethan, guess who I am?" He was speechless. It was none other than his business partner, the Spanish beauty Monica. She was the only one who had been with him since college. She asked, "Ethan, aren't you surprised?" He replied, "Wasn't the plan to negotiate for land? If you came along, who's handling it?" Her bright eyes flashed as she said, "In your heart, the company isn't as important as me, right?" He replied, "Of course. Don't try to play the pity card." His cousin, laughing from the side, said, "She's as pretty as your secretary." Then he secretly gave Monica a thumbs up, saying, "Go for it." Encouraged, Monica happily handed him the breakfast she had prepared, but just as she was about to give it to him, another tall figure appeared next to him. The person stood between them and casually handed him a lunchbox. Her hand was as soft as a young shoot, her skin as smooth as porcelain. She thoughtfully took out a wet wipe from her bag and offered to clean his hands, in a sweet voice saying, "The car is ready, boss." Anna had a sweet voice but an icy appearance. Ethan turned to look, and her delicate features caught his eye. She stared at him, standing in front of Monica as though she didn't even notice her. His secretary was getting more and more. He sighed and got into the car. Chapter 13. There had been many changes at home. First, Ethan went to his parents' graves to pay his respects. When he arrived, there was a dried bouquet of white chrysanthemums by the tombstone, swaying in the wind. It was probably left by some old friends of his parents. He moved the flowers aside and placed his own bouquet. He spoke to his parents about his life abroad, how his uncle had taken good care of him, how his aunt was a great cook except for the desserts, and how his sister and brother-in-law were struggling with taking care of their newborn. When it came to himself, he said everything was going well. He had family to rely on, graduated as an excellent student, and met many like-minded people in business. "Don't worry, I'm taking good care of myself," he said. It started to rain, and the rain was salty as it slid into his mouth. After the ceremony, they walked out of the cemetery. His cousin held an umbrella for Monica, and Anna walked beside him. Just as they passed a man and a woman, the woman was holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, and the man, holding an umbrella behind her, spoke in a sharp tone. "You could come every day and still not see Ethan. You're carrying our child. Why can't you consider my feelings?" The voice sounded familiar yet strange. Ethan instinctively looked over, and it was none other than Oliver and Clara. When his cousin and Monica heard his name, they looked at him. He shook his head, signaling them to ignore it. Oliver kept talking, but suddenly Clara stopped, turned around, grabbed his umbrella, and threw it aside. "Can you give me a break? You're really annoying," she said. Oliver, enraged, stomped on the umbrella he had thrown to the ground. Seeing the two of them about to cause a scene in front of his parents' tomb, Ethan hurriedly asked the cemetery staff to handle it. As for why he didn't reveal himself to Clara right away, he had come back to the country not for her. He was interested in the current real estate market, and if he was here to discuss business, he didn't want to get involved in any drama. Chapter 14. It was rather unfortunate. When he went to visit the old house, he ran into an elder. He was an old friend of his parents and the Carter family. He quickly called Mrs. Carter to inform her that Ethan had returned. Mrs. Carter was very excited and asked him to wait for her. "You kid, why didn't you tell me you were back? I was so worried about you. Wait for me to come pick you up," she said. Ethan replied, "No need, madam. I have other matters to attend to." The next second, he hung up the phone himself, then returned the phone to the elder. By the time Mrs. Carter and her daughter arrived, they had already left for a hotel in the city. They were going to attend a banquet that evening, a chance to meet with several developers from City A and discuss potential cooperation. The banquet was quite grand. and having grown used to toasting and socializing in France, they felt right at home here as well. At the banquet, Ethan had pleasant conversations with a few of the business owners. Part of this was due to his own perspective on business, and part of it was because these people had a shallow connection with his parents. With the network in place, the business talks went smoothly. Halfway through the event, there was some noise at the entrance of the hall. The host, Martin, looked displeased and asked what was happening. The staff replied, "Mr. Carter has no invitation but insists on entering." Martin looked at Ethan. He knew Ethan had been adopted by the Carter family. He smiled and said, "It's just a mistake. They forgot to send an invite to Mr. Carter. Please let him in." On the surface, Ethan remained indifferent, but inside, he couldn't help but find it amusing. Forgot to send an invitation. It was simply that they looked down on the Carter family's wealth. Without his financial support, the Carter family's small company would struggle to survive. In fact, due to various policy changes, their company was almost on the brink of bankruptcy. In such a situation, who would still want to deal with the Carter family? Ethan didn't stop Martin from letting them in. After all, outsiders didn't know the history between him and the Carter family. If word got out that he was being ungrateful, it wouldn't look good for him. So outwardly, he maintained appearances. Chapter 15. Clara's gaze immediately locked on Ethan. She was wearing a slightly worn high-end dress, which was a little wrinkled due to the recent scuffle, but she didn't bother to fix it and quickly walked toward him. "Ethan, you're finally back," she said, her eyes filled with an eager spark that made her dull, lifeless eyes shine brightly. Ethan didn't move. Just as Clara was about to reach him, 3 people stood in front of him. His cousin frowned and asked, "Who are you?" Monica put her hands on her hips and said, "Why is there another one?" Anna, having just taken a sip of water, pursed her lips and cleared her throat, ready to start scolding. Ethan sighed. They were serious business people after all. Clara's eyes suddenly turned red. "Ethan, why?" she asked. He had no intention of reminiscing with her, so he said, "It's been a long time. I still have things to do. You're free to do as you wish." Behind Clara, Mrs. Carter followed closely. Relying on her age, she shamelessly squeezed through and said, "Ethan, you kid, why did you just run off without a word? Where have you been all these years?" She grabbed his hand and began wiping her tears. Ethan expressionlessly pulled his hand away from hers and said, "Madam, the letter my uncle sent you. You received it, didn't you? Why didn't you tell me? Besides, I left a note when I left." Everyone in the room was sharp-witted, and after he said these 2 sentences, everyone could roughly guess what had happened. It wasn't because Mrs. Carter cared about him. It was because she cared too much about the wealth he owned. It was clear without saying much. Mrs. Carter immediately stopped crying, forced a smile, and said, "Ethan, don't be angry. How was I supposed to know if it was a scam? By the way, after you left, Clara looked for you for a long time. You two should catch up." She said this and forcibly pulled Clara to his side. Clara didn't say anything, just stared at him with red eyes, a gaze that made him uncomfortable. He furrowed his brow, and Anna walked over, telling Clara to keep her distance from him. "Please keep your distance from my husband," she said. Ethan was speechless. Monica snorted and said, "A guy who couldn't even win me over. You should give up already." Clara didn't look at them, just kept staring at Ethan and asked, "Why did you leave? Don't you know how long I searched for you?" He shook his head and said, "I don't know. Don't care to know, not interested in knowing, and don't want to know." Chapter 16. Clara choked up. She took a bracelet out of her pocket and said, "I fixed this for you. I came to find you that day because I wanted to make up with you, Ethan. I promise I won't be foolish again." She spoke with such sincerity, her eyes gleaming with tears. Monica glanced at the bracelet, then covered her mouth, giving a shallow smile. "Are you still in high school? What's this? So cheap and childish." Clara looked at Ethan deeply, her voice filled with a pitiful tone. "I'll do anything you want. Just please don't ignore me," she said. As for gifts, Ethan had never cared about their value, nor did he care whether he liked them or not. In the past, when Clara gave him her beloved doll, he was happy for a long time. The happiness came from the fact that someone he liked had given it to him. Now, not only did he no longer like Clara, but he couldn't even bring himself to waste any feelings of dislike on her. She was too weak. Putting aside the emotions that had clouded his judgment in his past life, she wasn't even worthy of being his opponent. "I still appreciate your rebellious nature, your attempts to control me. They're quite amusing, he said. She choked up and said, Ethan, those were just words out of anger. She hurriedly explained, but he waved his hand and said, It doesn't matter. He took a glass of champagne from a waiter, saying indifferently, Does your husband know you're here to see me? Please don't waste my time with business, okay? Clara's lips trembled, clearly shaken by the blow. In his past life, if he had wanted to say even one more word to her, she would have said he was disturbing her. She had a lot to do, like doing her hair, shopping, baking. But in truth, all she was doing was spending every night with Oliver, having children, and living a carefree life. As he was about to leave, Clara panicked. Please don't go. Let's start over, okay? Before he could respond, his cousin spoke up. Is your husband running over here to seduce my cousin? Who is this woman? Clara's face turned pale. She trembled and said, I didn't mean to hide my marriage, Ethan. I just wanted to win you back. Please don't be angry. I was tricked by Oliver. He drugged me, and that's how I made a mistake. All these years, I've kept myself for you. Wait, can we please not insult the phrase kept myself? Ethan said, What's there for me to be angry about? In the end, Mrs. Carter and her daughter were still escorted out by Martin. The banquet ended, but Clara was still waiting to see him. Unexpectedly, Oliver arrived and started punching and kicking her. You're carrying my child, and you're still going to meet with another man. How cheap can you be? He yelled. Pregnant women tend to be more irritable, and Clara lost her temper, yelling at him to get away. The two of them ended up fighting, and Oliver, furious, landed a punch and knocked Clara down. Crimson liquid began to trail down her leg. Ethan turned his gaze away and got into the car. Even as the blood kept flowing, Clara still screamed towards his car from a distance, continuously shouting his name. His cousin, in disbelief, said, She really is obsessed. What a trashy woman. Ethan corrected him, It's not obsession. She's trying to use our past to move me, to get me to help the Carter family. This kind of woman only loves herself. Chapter 17. The business negotiations went quite well. Ethan would be co-investing with Martin and others to develop the largest new shopping mall in City A. Due to the preliminary preparations, he needed to stay in the country for a while. Monica headed back first, and before she left, she couldn't stop nagging him. There's an old saying in your country, a good horse doesn't eat the grass it passed by. Don't make up with that woman. Also, that female secretary of yours is no good. Her voice is so soft, you can tell she's a pretentious coquette. Anna quietly walked over and said, Boss, actually, I can do a dominatrix voice too. Ethan rolled his eyes at both of them and said, Right now, I only want to make money. If you waste my time, I'll fire you both. Monica shot Anna a glare, huffed angrily, and got on the plane. Anna, however, silently adjusted her collar, seemingly trying to make her cleavage more obvious. Ethan was speechless. After Clara's miscarriage, she came to find him a few times later, but she became too preoccupied with her own issues and gave up. The Carter family felt utterly humiliated when they discovered Clara had cheated while pregnant. Oliver's relatives gathered together, came to City A, and demanded an explanation from the Carter family. The Carter family's company was already struggling, and after being stirred up by Oliver's relatives, they immediately declared bankruptcy. Oliver even hired a good lawyer to help him and Clara fight their divorce case, and he ended up with most of the Carter family's remaining assets. Mr. Carter, in despair over the bankruptcy, hanged himself at the company's old site. Mrs. Carter, devastated by the shock, became mentally unstable and wandered around, talking to the air, muttering to an imaginary son-in-law. She's your wife. Isn't it natural to spend money on your wife? Marrying an orphan like you is a downgrade. You should at least put some effort into it. Later, she ran onto the street throwing a tantrum and was hit by passing vehicles, ending up paralyzed in bed. Clara begged Oliver for money to pay for her mother's treatment, but most of Oliver's money had already gone to his relatives, and he had nothing left. What's more, Oliver had a grudge against the Carter family and refused to help. The two of them began arguing again, and this time, Clara blamed all her misfortunes on Oliver. But Oliver, not tolerating her, beat her senseless. However, no one knew that Clara had brought a knife with her. In the next moment, she attacked, leading to Oliver's death. Clara was quickly arrested. Meanwhile, Ethan kindly visited Mrs. Carter in the hospital and paid for her medical fees. Everyone praised him for his loyalty, but they didn't know he had hired the worst nurse for her. Soon, She was covered in bed sores, her entire body emitting a terrible stench. Ethan stood beside her, smiling, and said, "Madam, you have memories from your past life, don't you? When you tormented me, did you ever think that one day you'd end up in my hands? You knew Clara was seeing someone else, but you still accused me of being incapable. When I was starving, taking medicine, and bowing my head, your family was enjoying the good life. You got to enjoy your happiness while I suffered. Now it's your turn to feel what I went through." Mrs. Carter opened her eyes wide in anger, swinging her arms, but she couldn't even touch his sleeves. She could only open her mouth, drooling, her eyes filled with resentment. Ethan wasn't going to let her die. He would keep her alive, barely hanging on. Before Clara was executed, she requested to see Ethan, and he agreed. When she saw him, she cried and confessed, saying her mind was filled with memories that didn't belong to her. She saw how her indifference towards him in the past had caused him to live a lonely life. "Can you forgive me? I love you. I never faced my true feelings because I wanted to escape my parents' control. I always listened to them, but when they told me to love you, I became angry and rebelled. How childish of me. Now I've lost everything," she sobbed. Ethan shook his head. She actually laughed at herself and said, "It's okay. Hate me if you want. This life is so miserable for me. Maybe it's my punishment this time." Ethan couldn't help but laugh. "Punishment? How could it be so coincidental?" he said. The reflection in the glass showed his slightly excited expression as he continued. "You think your company's downfall was just a result of the environment? You think Oliver found the Banquet location by coincidence? You think it was so easy for you to miscarry? You think those poor relatives of his could easily find a top-notch legal team for him?" Clara's face slowly drained of color until it was completely pale, but her eyes were bloodshot. "Do you hate me this much?" she asked. Why wouldn't I hate her? Ethan thought. In his past life, he didn't do anything that would harm anyone, yet he lived a life worse than death. It was because the Carter family coveted his wealth, ruining his entire life. In this life, he'd only made a few small adjustments, and he was already being merciful. Those choices were all made by the Carter family themselves. He stood up, leaving Clara with his last words. "I'll let your mother know about your execution." He left the prison and got into a car. A black sedan sped through the rain. The newly developed commercial district had already started to take shape, with tall buildings rising up. The future that belonged to him was on its way.